My daughter Ava was born with brittle bone disease, a rare condition that made even the smallest fall a risk of serious injury. But despite that, she had the heart of a warrior. At just 6 years old, she had already survived 6 surgeries, spent more time in casts than out of them, and yet she smiled like the world had never heard her. She had a laugh that could melt glaciers, a soul too pure for this world, and eyes that held galaxies of strength. We moved into this suburban, gated community hoping for peace, safety, and acceptance, a fresh start. I kept a low profile, never mentioning my position as commander of Metropolitan Police because I wanted us to be seen not through the lens of power or influence, but as just another family looking for a little slice of peace. Our house stood in the center of the cul-de-sac, a modest two-story surrounded by neat hedges and a ramp installed on the porch for Ava's wheelchair. The neighborhood looked perfect, kids riding bikes, dogs barking cheerfully, lawns trimmed like pages from a gardening magazine. It seemed at first glance like paradise, but what we didn't realize was that behind those white fences lurked something far darker than we ever imagined. It started subtly. A woman named Sharon, the self-proclaimed HOA president, approached me one afternoon while Ava was drawing chalk art on our driveway. "Children shouldn't be doing that," she said, gesturing to the unicorn Ava had sketched with a pink chalk stick clutched in her tiny hand. "It's against community aesthetic codes." Her voice was syrupy sweet, but her eyes were knives. I apologized politely, thinking she was just particular, and brushed it off. Ava, being the kind child she was, offered the woman a drawing of a flower. Sharon didn't even look at it. She turned her back and walked away. I should have known then. The days rolled by, and the complaints started piling up. One day it was Ava's medical ramp being too industrial-looking. Another, our mailbox wasn't compliant with HOA-style standards. But it escalated quickly, too quickly. The woman began to watch us. I'd see her SUV drive slowly past our house several times a day. Once, I caught her taking pictures of Ava from across the street as my daughter was blowing soap bubbles in the yard. For documentation purposes, she claimed when I confronted her. My fists clenched, my blood boiled, but I held back because I didn't want to draw attention to my position. Not yet. My wife, Grace, a schoolteacher with the patience of a saint, tried to reason with me, saying maybe Sharon was just strict. But even she began to notice the malicious edge sharpening behind every HOA notice that landed in our mailbox. When Ava painted a rock garden in the yard to raise awareness for children with disabilities, Karen, that's what the neighborhood began calling Sharon behind closed doors, reported us for unauthorized landscaping. The rocks were removed. The neighbors smiled but never spoke up. Some were afraid, others complicit. I started noticing Ava withdrawing. Her joy dimmed. She didn't want to go outside. She stares at me, Ava whispered one night, while I tucked her in, like she wants to hurt me. I reassured her with soft words and a tight hug, but deep down, something twisted in my gut. This wasn't normal. One afternoon, Grace took Ava to the park in her wheelchair while I reviewed old cold case files on the patio. When they came back, Ava's face was pale. She called me a monster. Ava said, her tiny voice trembling. I turned to Grace. Her eyes brimmed with tears. Karen was there, she said. She walked past us and said, loud enough for Ava to hear, that cripples don't belong in perfect neighborhoods. I stood frozen. I wanted to charge into her house, badge or no badge, and tear her world apart. But I didn't. Not yet. I filed a formal complaint to the HOA board. It was ignored. In fact, the next day, I received a fine for abusive conduct toward an HOA member. The audacity left me speechless. Then came the incident with the community pool. Ava was watching the water ripple from her wheelchair, just admiring the reflections. She didn't even get in the water. Karen approached, phone already recording, and demanded Ava be removed from the pool deck because wheelchairs are a health hazard. Grace stood her ground. Karen called security. The guard showed up and demanded we leave. Ava cried the entire way home, her small fingers clenching my sleeve, asking if she really was a monster like Karen said. My heart broke into a million shards. That night, I stared at her while she slept and made a decision. If this woman came near my daughter again, she would meet the full force of a father who spent 2 decades putting away monsters in uniforms and suits alike. But fate had already moved faster than I anticipated. A week later, I received a text from my neighbor Julie. Get home. Now. Something happened to Ava. I dropped everything and drove like a madman. Sirens in my mind. Prayers on my lips. I arrived to chaos. Ava's wheelchair was overturned on the sidewalk, bent and broken. Blood stained the pavement. Grace sat beside Ava, who lay limp in her arms, barely conscious. Bones at odd angles. Her face swollen. Her tiny frame unmoving. She pushed her. Grace screamed through tears. Karen shoved her down the stairs of the clubhouse. She said she was in the way. Time slowed. My vision blurred. My soul shattered. Neighbors watched from behind their curtains. No one helped. No one dared. I scooped my daughter in my arms, her body barely holding together, and rushed to the hospital. 26 fractures. Skull, ribs, spine, both arms, legs. The doctor said she shouldn't have survived, that it was a miracle covered in casts and pain. I sat beside her hospital bed, gripping her tiny hand, the beeping machines the only sign that life still fought within her. Karen hadn't been arrested, not even detained. She claimed it was an accident. That Ava ran into her and tripped. The responding officer, one of the HOA's hired part-time security, backed her up. I stared at the police report. False. Corrupt. Twisted. That night, as I held my daughter's bruised and broken hand, I knew the time for silence was over. The man these people dismissed as just another suburban dad was about to show them who he really was. Commander of police, protector of smell of antiseptic, and they had hurt the wrong child. As I sat motionless beside Ava's hospital bed, my eyes fixated on the rhythmic beep of the heart monitor as though it were the only thing keeping me sane. Her entire body was wrapped in layers of plaster and gauze, small tubes trailing from her arms. Wires snaking to machines, humming with the quiet urgency of survival. Her face, once full of light and innocence, was now a battlefield of bruises and cuts, her eyelids too swollen to fully open. I felt helpless, like a man with a badge who could take down criminal syndicates and corrupt officials, but had somehow failed to protect the one person who needed me most. I had faced terrorists, serial killers, and predators in my career, but nothing had prepared me for this. Seeing my child shattered by someone who was supposed to be our neighbor, a woman who waved HOA pamphlets like legal scriptures and smiled with venom behind her lips, the doctor said Ava had suffered 26 fractures. Both arms, femur, 3 ribs, her collarbone, and even her cheekbone were cracked or broken. One more wrong angle, one more second of neglect, and she wouldn't have made it. I sat in silence for hours, watching the machines breathe for her, watching Grace's tears fall onto the thin hospital sheet, both of us too stunned to speak. Then came the insult that would turn my grief into rage. A man in a suit and tie strolled into the room like he was visiting a friend, not the victim of a brutal assault. "Mr. Hayes," he said, coolly, holding out a business card. "I'm Dennis Greaves, HOA legal advisor. I've come to offer our deepest condolences and a solution." I didn't shake his hand. I just stared. "We understand there's been an incident," he continued. "And while it's tragic, Mrs. Walker, that's Sharon's legal name, insists it was a tragic accident. In fact, she's pressing charges for harassment against your wife." That was it. My fist clenched around the metal hospital chair arm. She pushed my daughter down concrete steps. I growled, "There are bruises on her back that match stair edges. And you're telling me she's pressing charges?" He nodded like he'd just told me the weather. "It's all about how things are reported, Commander." So he knew. "I looked you up. It'd be a shame if the story turned into a commander abusing his power against a civilian woman with a clean record." A clean record? That phrase lit a fire under my skin. I stood, towering over him. "Get out." His smile faltered. "I came here as a courtesy. Get out before I forget I'm a lawman." He left, but the rage remained. It bloomed like a storm behind my ribs. I had protected this country's streets for 21 years, watched men fall in shootouts, saved children from traffickers, buried friends in uniform. Yet, the law was now being used to protect a monster who had nearly killed my daughter. And worse, the system around her was helping. The police report filed by the HOA's off-duty rent-a-cop claimed Ava's injuries were self-inflicted due to reckless movement. According to him, Ava had lunged forward without provocation and lost balance. He failed to mention that Ava couldn't even walk on her own. I demanded the security footage from the clubhouse, only to be told the camera system was undergoing maintenance that day. Convenient. Too convenient. I knew what this was. Cover up. Small town politics. HOA leverage. And Karen had her claws deep in every corner of this neighborhood. I had seen this pattern before, back when I worked internal affairs. The powerful insulating each other from justice under the pretense of rules, order, and appearance. Grace sat with Ava while I returned to the house for one thing, my badge. I wasn't going to let this go through civilian channels anymore. I didn't need approval. I was the highest-ranking officer in my district. That meant I had access to surveillance feeds, state-level criminal databases, and a small team I could trust blindly. I called in a favor from my most loyal investigator, Detective Kira Novak, someone I had personally trained. Pull everything you can on Sharon Walker, I said. Dig until the roots snap. Within an hour, she had begun compiling documents. I returned to the hospital with my laptop and camped next to Ava's bed. While she lay unconscious, I built a digital case file from scratch. The more I dug, the more sinister the picture became. Sharon had served on multiple HOA boards across 3 states. In each one, there were suspicious complaints against minority families, families with special needs children, and single mothers. In one instance, a mother of a boy with autism claimed Sharon forced them out by fining them $10,000 over supposed noise violations. In another, a Vietnam veteran with PTSD was publicly humiliated and later hospitalized after Sharon's campaign of noncompliance drove him to a breakdown. The pattern was sickening. She had destroyed families under the disguise of maintaining community standards. And each time, she left just before lawsuits were filed, only to surface again elsewhere under a slightly different name or board title. But this time, she made a mistake. She touched a commander's daughter. I gathered statements from neighbors under the radar, those too afraid to speak publicly, but willing to confide once they learned who I was. One, a teenager named Lauren, secretly recorded Karen saying, "They should be thankful we even let that thing live here. The father's always gone anyway. Useless." Another neighbor revealed Karen's threats to have them evicted if they talked to us. A pattern of intimidation, documented and now in my hands. Still, the local precinct refused to arrest her. "We don't have hard evidence," they said. "The HOA board is backing her version." It was then I realized this wouldn't be solved by reports alone. It would take exposure. I made the decision to involve the state attorney's office directly. But before I could file, another threat arrived, this time not subtle. A brick through our hospital room window. Taped to it, a note. "Drop it, or your wife's next." The surveillance cameras at the hospital? Disabled for renovation. They were watching us, monitoring our every move. I sent Grace and Ava under police protection to a safe location while I stayed behind. I turned my house into a surveillance hub and installed covert cameras around the clubhouse and HOA office. I needed Karen on video. I needed her caught in the act. And it happened sooner than I expected. 3 nights later, Karen met with 3 men behind the clubhouse. They were discussing eliminating evidence and pressuring the board to silence the father. All of it was recorded. The mic caught her saying the words, "That crippled girl ruined everything. If she dies, it's her fault, not mine." I watched the footage in pure silence. That was it, the evidence I needed. I compiled everything: audio, victim statements, medical records, past HOA lawsuits, and submitted it directly to the Attorney General's office. A grand jury was requested within 24 hours. But still no arrest. Karen walked freely. She smiled at neighbors. She waved to news cameras pretending to be the victim of harassment. She claimed we were trying to financially destroy a neighborhood pillar. But behind those dead eyes, I saw it, she knew. She was cornered. And she was dangerous. I visited Ava again the next morning. She was awake now, still unable to move, still surrounded by casts and tubes, but awake. She reached for my hand. Did I do something wrong? She whispered. My chest shattered all over again. No, baby, I said, my voice cracking. You did everything right. And now, Daddy's going to make sure she never hurts anyone again. Her eyes searched mine, desperate, fragile. You promise? I leaned in and kissed her forehead. I swear it on every star in the sky. The world had underestimated Ava. They underestimated me. But I wasn't just a father. I was Commander Hayes. And I was going to take down the entire empire this monster had built, brick by brick, board by board, until every person who protected her was buried beneath the truth. Karen thought she broke my daughter. But all she did was unleash something far more dangerous than she could imagine, a father with a badge and nothing left to lose. The day I walked into headquarters with Ava's medical report clutched in one hand and a folder of evidence in the other, the air around me changed. The usual chatter died, officers stepped aside, and even the steel in the walls seemed to brace for impact because I wasn't walking in as just Commander Hayes. I was a father with unfinished business and a bone-deep fury that would not be silenced. My assistant captain, Rivera, took one look at my face and said nothing, only nodded and followed me into the operations room where we launched Operation Claymore, a classified investigation built from scratch with only 5 hand-picked officers I trusted more than blood. We split the investigation into 4 key targets: Sharon Walker, HOA Karen, the HOA board, the corrupt private security firm on her payroll, and the trail of previous victims spanning across 3 states. My plan wasn't just to get justice for Ava, it was to destroy the empire Karen had built through fear, intimidation, and unchecked authority, and we began by pulling every HOA public document, city ordinance, neighborhood camera angle, and complaint filed over the last 5 years. The deeper we went, the darker it got. We uncovered dozens of HOA cover-ups, including one where Karen allegedly falsified documents to evict a disabled veteran after failure to comply with fake lawn standards, and another where a Hispanic single mother lost custody of her children because Karen submitted video footage to CPS claiming unsafe conditions, all of which turned out to be edited. One by one, these victims were contacted and brought into the fold, our silent army of the oppressed, now speaking out under our shield. But the real smoking gun came when Kira Novak, my top investigator, cracked Karen's private email archive. Buried in years of smug correspondence was one labeled Emergency Disable Footage. In it, she instructed her security chief to destroy the original surveillance hard drives from the day Ava was attacked and replace them with dummy footage showing an empty staircase. We traced the deletion order to a small tech firm subcontracted under the HOA budget. That's when I authorized the first search warrant. My team raided the security firm's office, and within hours, we found the original footage, corrupted but recoverable. What we saw confirmed everything. Ava rolling toward the staircase on the clubhouse's upper floor, Karen storming toward her, yelling something we couldn't hear at first. Then, with shocking clarity, she grabbed the wheelchair handles and yanked them hard, tipping Ava forward with brutal force. My baby girl tumbled down 13 concrete steps like a rag doll, her body folding in ways no child's body ever should. Karen didn't even flinch. She watched, turned, and walked away. That moment will never leave me. Not in this life or the next. We enhanced the audio. Her final words as Ava screamed, "Good riddance." That clip became Exhibit A. The rest came in waves. A whistleblower from the HOA board reached out, a woman named Marla, who admitted Karen had blackmailed them for years with photos, debts, and secrets. She confessed to helping falsify HOA records to silence complaints and inflate fines. Another board member fled the state once subpoenas were announced. But Karen stayed calm, smug, cocky. She even held a press conference claiming she was being politically targeted by a rogue cop with a grudge. That was fine. I let her smile for the cameras, while we quietly built the noose around her. Then came the final play. I personally delivered the full case file, video, audio, emails, testimony, financial fraud, to the state attorney general and requested immediate indictment. Within 12 hours, the grand jury convened. Charges filed: attempted murder, child endangerment, destruction of evidence, witness intimidation, obstruction of justice, and conspiracy to defraud public funds. Still, we knew Karen would try to flee. So, I ordered surveillance on her house, her bank accounts frozen, her passport flagged. But it was Ava's strength that sealed the deal. When I showed her the video, against every instinct of a father, she cried, then clenched her tiny fist and said, "Don't let her do this to anyone else, Daddy." That was all I needed. We waited until Karen attended an emergency HOA board meeting she called to clear her name. She strutted into that building like she owned the city, but when she stepped out 2 hours later, she didn't walk into a cheering crowd. She walked into a circle of armed officers with me at the center. I approached as she blinked in the flashing red and blue lights, trying to understand what was happening. "Sharon Walker," I said, holding up my badge and the arrest warrant. "You're under arrest for the attempted murder of my daughter, Ava Hayes, and about 9 other crimes I'll enjoy watching you explain under oath." Her mouth opened, then closed. She shook her head. "You can't do this. This is harassment. This is abuse of power." I leaned close, low enough that only she could hear me. "No, this is what real power looks like when it's finally done playing nice." She screamed, tried to run, but my team tackled her to the ground. She wailed like a banshee, thrashing and shrieking that she was the victim. But no one listened this time. Her mask had shattered. The board members were dragged in too, one by one. Subpoenas rained like hail. News trucks swarmed. Cameras rolled. And I made sure every second of her downfall was documented because the world needed to see that monsters don't always wear masks. Sometimes they wear pearls and hold clipboards. I returned to the hospital that night, drained, shaking, and stood beside Ava's bed. "It's done," I said. "She's in custody. She'll never hurt you or anyone again." Ava smiled through the bruises, barely able to move her lips. "You kept your promise." I took her hand. "Always." But this wasn't just justice. It was a message to every Karen who thinks a title makes them untouchable, to every board member who trades humanity for power, to every system that silences the weak. I was just getting started. And my badge? My badge didn't make me powerful. Being Ava's father did. The courtroom was packed wall to wall, the weight of what had happened to my daughter thick in the air like smoke, and as I sat beside Grace on the front bench with Ava, still fragile, still healing, resting in her wheelchair between us, I felt a silence fall over the room not unlike the pause before storm breaks, the collective breath of a town realizing that monsters can wear HOA badges and smile for cameras while committing crimes under their nose. Sharon Walker, Karen, was brought in shackled and stone-faced, her pearl earrings gone, her perfectly coiled hair now disheveled, makeup failing to mask the panic trembling beneath her cold exterior. She scanned the courtroom, her gaze pausing on us, and for a brief moment, I saw it, that flicker of doubt, of fear, like even she had finally realized she'd gone too far. The judge, a sharp-eyed woman with a spine forged from steel and a reputation for cutting through privilege, called the trial to order, and the prosecution began methodically tearing down every wall Karen had built. Exhibit A, the recovered surveillance video showing Ava's brutal fall, Karen's hand pushing that wheelchair with cold finality, and her callous words before turning away like nothing happened. The jury gasped. So did half the town. Exhibit B, audio recordings of Karen conspiring to delete evidence, blackmail board members, and use HOA authority as a personal weapon. Exhibit C, victim testimonies, one after the other, people who had been too afraid to speak until now, families destroyed, children bullied, homeowners bankrupted, all in the name of aesthetic regulations and community standards. But it was Ava's moment on the witness stand that shattered the courtroom. Swaddled in a blanket, Her voice a whisper, but her eyes unwavering. She looked at the jury and said, "She called me broken, but I'm not. She is." Gasps echoed again, and even the judge had to clear her throat before nodding for her to continue. Ava spoke slowly, bravely of how Karen called her names, of the pain, of the terror, of waking up in a hospital not knowing if she'd ever walk again. Her words weren't rehearsed, they were raw, pure, devastating. Karen tried to shift blame in her defense, claiming Ava rolled toward the stairs too quickly, that no one knew how fragile she was, and that I, the father, was using my position to ruin her reputation. But under cross-examination, she crumbled. Her lies unraveled with every pointed question. Her rage began to show, and eventually she snapped. "I did what I had to do. That kid doesn't belong here. She's a hazard. She doesn't belong anywhere near normal children." The courtroom fell dead silent. The jury stared. The prosecutor turned slowly to the judge. "Your Honor, I rest my case." After that, the verdict was swift, guilty on all counts. Attempted murder, child abuse, destruction of evidence, witness intimidation, obstruction of justice, financial fraud. Hate crime enhancements were added. Karen didn't speak when the judge sentenced her to life in prison with no possibility of parole for the first 25 years. She only sat there, shaking, lips trembling, staring at Ava like she still didn't understand how a child she thought was weak had brought her empire to its knees. But the courtroom wasn't done. One by one, community members stood and turned their backs on her as she was led away. The HOA was dissolved by emergency vote. The remaining board members were either arrested or resigned in disgrace. The neighborhood that once stood silently now rose, some with apologies, others with guilt, but all united in the truth. We didn't stop there. With Grace's help, we started the Ava Hayes Foundation, an organization dedicated to protecting disabled children from abuse and discrimination in schools, communities, and housing systems. Donations flooded in. Laws were rewritten. The city council issued a formal apology. And 3 months later, on a cool spring morning, Ava stood up for the first time on her own since the attack, braces on her legs, supported by months of therapy and more courage than most grown men carry in their whole lives. I stood across from her in the garden we planted together, flowers in every color, rocks painted with words like brave, justice, and hope. She smiled, eyes shimmering, and whispered, "I walked, Daddy." And I, a man who had faced death, stared down cartels, and led squads into war zones, wept like a child, not because I was sad, not because I was relieved, but because I realized in that moment what real strength looked like, and it wasn't in my badge or my title or my courtroom victory. It was in her, in Ava, a child who had every bone broken, but not her spirit, a little girl who stood taller than anyone else in that town. And as I carried her wheelchair into the garage, now symbolic, no longer necessity, I knew Karen didn't just lose a case. She lost to a girl she once called broken. She lost to love, to resilience, to truth. She lost to a father who promised his daughter justice and delivered.